Hello, welcome to Little Literati. I'm Jess, and I'm so excited for May. It's going to be a wonderful month for our family. But before we can talk about May, we have to wrap up April. So I read 13 books this month. I did not read about half of the books I talked about in my TBR video, but I will talk about why in a little bit later. So let's get started. I had read the first book of the Others series and talked about that. These are the last 4 books in the series. The second one is Murder of Crows, third one is Vision in Silver, and the fourth one is Marked in Flesh, and the last and fifth one is Etched in Bone. So I had bought the first 4 books in the series, and I really did enjoy them. I'll have to admit, the later books in the series weren't quite as fun as the first one, but I did still really enjoy them. The scope of the story seemed to kind of back out with each book. So the first one was really focused on the courtyard, and then the second was focused on the city, and then the region, and the continent, and everything like that. And then it all kind of got brought together in this last book, Etched in Bone. And so I kind of felt it was a very good bookend to the series. The first one started out small, the second one kind of wrapped it all up and brought it back home, back to being small and focused on the courtyard again. So I did enjoy the series. Again, they weren't quite as fun as the first one, so there weren't as many funny moments, but I did still really enjoy the series, and I'm glad I bought them, and I'm looking forward to when Etched in Bone goes on paperback next year. I did finally read The 13th Tale again this month. I had said I was going to be reading it in March, but I decided that since I was hosting book club in the second week of the month of April, that I wanted it to be fresh so that I could have a clearer perspective on questions I wanted to talk about, topics I wanted to bring up in our meeting. So I wanted it to be fresh in my mind, and so I read this just a couple of days before my book club. It was pretty popular as far as our book club selections have gone. Only 3 other people showed up, which is fine with me, because that's about the right number of people that I feel comfortable talking and sharing with. So I thought it was a really fun book club. I really enjoyed hosting it and talking about this book. We had a lot of really good discussion about this, and I really do love this book. I've read this several times. It is one of my favorite books ever, and it was really nice to be able to rediscover the joy of this book and how much I enjoy reading it with new, fresher eyes. So this is The 13th Tale. I finally finished A Season of Spells. I did enjoy this book. It was so long to read. It took so long for me to finally finish this book. I was reading this pretty much the entire month of April, just off and on. Not that I couldn't get into it, because, like I said, the story, I really was enjoying the story. It was so dense, and I would pick it up and would read a couple of chapters and would really be enjoying the story. I just, for some reason, would then put it back down and want to read something else. Probably because I felt I wasn't making enough progress on this book, and I felt I needed to read other books in the interim just to feel that I was making momentum on my TBR list. But I did finally finish this just a few days ago, and so it is done. I do have the whole trilogy. I've read them all. I do enjoy them. It'll probably take me a while to reread them, though, just because they take a little bit longer to get through. But this is a good wrap-up to the trilogy. There are a couple of books that I did not talk about, but that had seemed interesting. And this arrived at my library. I put it on hold because it had seemed interesting a couple of months ago when I first saw it. And so I put a hold on it. It finally arrived. And I thought, well, it's pretty small, so I'll give it a shot. And this is The Invisible Library. It's the first in... There are at least 3 books, and I think a 4th one's coming out, so I don't know how long the series is actually going to be. But this one was pretty fun. If you've ever seen the TV show The Librarians, there were some similarities to that. There were a lot of very familiar elements to this. It felt like she had grabbed a couple of elements from several different series and stories, but she wove them together really well, and I really enjoyed this story. It was a light, refreshing read. There's the library, and it is this kind of dimension unto itself, and the librarians go out to all these parallel alternate worlds trying to gather and collect rare artifacts from these different worlds. So in one world there might be a copy of Grimm's fairy tales, but they might have a couple of extra stories in that timeline's history that we don't have in ours, or that another world doesn't have in theirs. And so they pull these different manuscripts and stories together and keep them safe so that nothing could ever happen to them, like say what happened to the library at Alexandria. So that was a really fun take on it. There was a dragon in here, and I don't know what it is, but lately when I read books that have dragons, they all seem to be named Kai. Not sure what's up with that, but I think the same thing happened in The Shadow Queen. So that was just kind of a funny similarity that I noticed and picked up on. But I did enjoy The Invisible Library. It was really fun, and I'll probably eventually pick up the next couple of books in the series. I just don't know when, because May is going to be kind of crazy, so it might have to wait till June. But this one was really a lot of fun, and it was really light, easy, fun read. So I would recommend The Invisible Library. I bought, because I had the other books in the trilogy, this set of stories from the Girl of Fire and Thorns series. And I was a little nervous picking this up because the first story in here talks about the rivalry between the two sisters that takes place in the first book, but from the older sister's point of view. And the second one talks about Mara and her escape from her village's destruction, and then the third book is about Hector and how he even joined the Guard in the first place before he even became the captain of the King's Guard. So I was a little nervous about reading these just because sometimes when you like a book really, really well, shorter stories or novellas don't really capture all of the heart and all of what makes the longer novels so good. And so the fact that this is a really short book and has 3 stories in it made me a little bit nervous. And when I was reading the first story, I was like, well, I don't know if I'm going to really like Elisa, because she wasn't really that likable at the beginning of the first book. And Elodia was just kind of obnoxious in the first book. But as I was reading it, every single one of the stories brought home a different emotion for me, and just was really great in its own small, succinct way. And so I really did enjoy each of these stories. Like I said, entirely different from one another, but they brought a little bit more depth and more background to several of the characters that we really get to know and love in the original trilogy. So I thought it was a lot of fun. I'm really glad I bought this. I picked up this book at the used bookstore because it was sitting there and it was on super cheap sale. And I have read Pride and Prejudice a couple of times, and I have seen the web miniseries, not really a miniseries, it's just the web series, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, several times over. And they were a lot of fun, and just really cute, fun, modern take on Pride and Prejudice. But I had been a little bit wary about reading The Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet by the producer and director of that web series, because I thought, well, we pretty much see all of Lizzie's inner thoughts on her videos, so really what could a book like this bring to it? And for the most part, it was very similar to what she talks about in the videos, so there wasn't a lot of new information in here, but her personality and snark really did shine through in here. And there were a couple of incidences that we did not get to see on the videos that kind of made a little bit more sense given the background in the diary. So this was really fun. I read this in an evening. I was also at the same time rewatching some of the episodes to see how they compared to one another and to see where each episode was tied in with each entry of her diary. So that was a lot of fun, and it was just fun. That's all it was. It was just cute, fun version of Pride and Prejudice. This is The Secret Diary of Lizzie Bennet. I finally finished King's Cage by Victoria Aveyard. This is book 3 in the Red Queen series. It's not a trilogy because there's going to be at least another book that's coming out probably next year. And that is really what led me to take so long to finish this book, because I was hoping it was going to be a trilogy that I could finish and wrap up and be done. But hearing that there was going to be at least a fourth book really slowed my momentum, because I was like, well, then why am I even putting myself through this if there's going to be even more to come? But I finally finished it, and it took me almost till the end of the month. I only finished it a couple of days ago. But I finally finished it, and I have to say, this is better, in my opinion, than The Glass Sword, which was book 2. So this is probably on a level with the first book, which, if you'll remember from a previous video, was not my favorite book by any means. It was okay, it was fine, but I didn't love it, and that's kind of how I felt about this. Mare is a lot more likable in this than she was in the second book. In the second one, she was so whiny and bitter and just really not a pleasant person to read. This one, she kind of gets herself back to who she should be and who she is really inside. I do have to say, though, in the first 2/3 of the book, nothing really happens to her, because she's Maven's prisoner, and so we get a lot of scenes from her point of view, but nothing really happens in them. So a lot of stuff happens with the other characters in the books, but she just sits there on her hands for 2/3 of the book before things finally start to happen to her. So I liked her better, but we also didn't get to see as much of her really being herself as I would have liked, maybe. So I finished this, and I don't know whether or not I'll read the next book in the series. I guess we'll just have to play it by ear when it comes out and see how I'm feeling that particular month. So, King's Cage. I did read a couple of very long books this month, so I feel better about not having finished all of the books I talked about in my last video. And I did read extra ones too, but I did read several long ones. And this was one of them, Six of Crows. It's a very big book. I do love the painted edges. I think those are a lot of fun. This I have seen raved about everywhere on the internet. And so I was a little nervous because her Grisha trilogy was not my favorite. I thought it was fine. I liked it, but I was nervous about this not living up to my expectations because everyone loved it so much. So I was a little bit wary when I picked this up, but I have to say, I really did enjoy this. Is it my favorite book ever? No. Is it my favorite book of the year? No. But I did enjoy all the characters and getting to know them, their backstory. There are several flashbacks in here, and so the interweave between the present day and the past really is an interesting take on who these people are and how did they become the way they are, and why are they interacting with each other the way that they are. And so it was a very fun, well, not fun. It was dark. It was very interesting book. And it was enjoyable, even if it wasn't fun. So this was Six of Crows. I did like this, and the story mostly gets wrapped up at the end. There is definitely room for the second book to start. I was not able to get to Crooked Kingdom this month, just because by the second half of the month, I was deciding I should probably focus on library books rather than books I owned, but I still wasn't able to get to some of the ones that I had checked out. So I didn't get to read Crooked Kingdom, but I am actually looking forward to it for reading next month, or this month, because Six of Crows was good enough for me to look forward to the next book. This is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I got this in my fairy loot box, I think last month. And I was really excited to read this. It also has the fun blue painted pages. The only thing that would have made this more fun, really, is if the actual words themselves had been printed in blue ink, like A.G. Howard's books. But that's a very, very tiny, minor note that would have been kind of fun. The book itself is very imaginative. And parts of it did feel familiar. If you've ever read Heart's Blood by Juliette Marillier, there were a couple of characters that reminded me of characters from her book. And so I could kind of see where she might take similar characters, and she did. But even so, even knowing how it might turn out, it was still fun to see how people ended up the way they did. A very fun thing happened to me. I was about, I don't know, halfway through this book, and I have to say, Strange the Dreamer, I did not know when I first heard about this that it was about someone named Strange who was the dreamer. I thought it was a descriptor, as in weird, the dreamer kind of thing. No, it's a name. Laszlo Strange is the main character, so Strange the Dreamer, which makes a lot more sense, really. And I was about halfway through reading it, and there's another character in here whose nickname is the Muse of Nightmares. And so I turned to my husband out of the blue and said, I really hope the next book is called Muse of Nightmares, because that would kind of fit with the title scheme, and I would really like to see more of her and see how the characters interact with each other. And so I finished this book, and I went on Goodreads to say that I'd finished it and looked down to see when the next book was coming out. And sure enough, it is actually going to be called Muse of Nightmares. So obviously she didn't get that idea from me, but it always makes me feel really, really extra clever when I can guess, or I guess great minds think alike, when I can kind of come up with the same idea that the author did independently of the author. It always makes me feel extra clever. So Strange the Dreamer was a lot of fun. It ended almost literally on a cliffhanger. It's about a chapter away from a cliffhanger. Literally. They are not hanging anymore, but events ended in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of really, really crucial events. And so I don't know how I'm going to be able to make it until Muse of Nightmares comes out next year. That's going to really, really suck. But the book did not. The book was really wonderful. I did not get to go see Laini Taylor at my library. Some other things came up in our family, and so I wasn't able to reserve tickets and go. But regardless, the book was a lot of fun, and I'm really glad I read this. This last one has been on my list for a few months now, and I finally got around to reading it. Woohoo! So I don't have to have it hanging over my head anymore. This was Swimming Lessons by Claire Fuller. I got this from Book of the Month in December, so it's taken me 4 months to read this. And like I mentioned in a previous video, I've been really worried about this one because it wasn't like I wanted this book and that I had to have it and was really looking forward to it. It was just kind of the least of the evils that were on the website that month. But I did read it, and although it wasn't my favorite book ever, I do have to say it at least accomplished something, because I felt things while reading this book. I felt angry. I felt sad. I felt some joy with some of the characters. And the main character felt very relatable. And the events that happened to her, I've definitely sympathized and empathized with her in how her life plays out. And it made me feel very, very glad that I do not have to experience what she does and did. And it made me very grateful that my husband isn't a jerk. That I married actually a good guy, unlike her. Anyway, Swimming Lessons, not really what I was expecting. I mean, it kind of was, but it was better than I was afraid of. So I finally finished this, and I am now done, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And so those were the books that I read in April. So 13 books this month. Like I said, I wasn't able to get to some of them because others came that I wasn't expecting, but that I was really excited to read, and so I wanted to get a jump on those. And I was also just kind of in a reading slump this month. I watched a lot of television. I rewatched several episodes of one of my favorite shows, Leverage. We watched Gargoyles, which I'd heard a lot of things about, and decided to give it a shot, and there were some fun literary references in that. We watched the first season. I haven't seen the second season yet, but even so, there were some fun literary references. I was like, hee hee, there's Alice in Wonderland, and there's Dracula, and there's Macbeth. And so that was kind of fun. But it was also making me feel guilty that I wasn't really attacking my TBR as much as I thought and hoped I would. So I will attempt to do better in May, and we will talk about that in my next video. But in the meantime, thank you for staying with me for this month. And please let me know what you're reading or that you have read in April. Let me know what you thought about these books. And stay tuned for the next video. And in the meantime, thank you so much, and we will see you next time.